I think that going to Venice, I had traveled a lot as a kid because I was an Army brat. So I already knew about moving around. But going to Venice was the very first time that I was confronted with this issue of just making work out of a studio. It goes up to this day of me being in Senegal and having this paperwork. And as you had said, I think Venice, that was one of the first things that it really influenced me, and especially in this last year.
Well, I remember when I was drawing there and sketching, I was kind of medium satisfied with my work. But then AJ, who was also there, you remember AJ?
Yeah.
He was saying that sometimes he does work, but then the better work comes afterwards. So you're doing like studies or play on, there. And indeed, when I got back to Pratt, like I did the studies in pastels, but then when I got back to school, I was doing some work from that. And I thought it was really interesting. So there was kind of like a breakthrough period after the time. And I've had that experience several times. I went to Portugal a few years ago and I was just like, just taking it all in without any specific project. And then when I came back, my pictures were like, I did these pictures and I wasn't thinking at all. And somebody said, oh, it looks just like Portugal. And it was just the colors and the forms and things. It wasn't anything explicitly like that.
Have any strong recollections of the faculty when you were in Venice that year?
Diana was taking us around every Friday. That's what I remember, to different museums, buildings, architecture buildings, see paintings and things like that. And it was a lot. It was like really taking it all in. It seemed like so much. So sometimes it felt like, wow, it's so much I can't really, because at the same way, it's like it stays with you. You've seen all these things and then it kind of sticks with you. So I would say that and so she introduced us. I remember Titian, Tintoretto. We went to quite a lot of places. It's hard to remember them all at this point, 35 years later and 37 years later. And then, but it was great. It was really great. And then also, I remember Richards Rubens, who was there. And I was thinking the classes were not so formal, I think, because it was the first year. But there was this thing of living together. And that was kind of nice because I remember sometimes that he might be looking at a sketchbook. And that was really cool to just be sitting there hanging out with your teacher and having him look at your sketchbook and give you really good feedback and that kind of thing. And that was pretty pertinent, I'd say. That was nice. And
my take on the faculty was it was a really great balance. And what you said, Diana has this, she knows by heart this knowledge of Renaissance art and architecture, and it was really good. And she knew where to take us and what to show us. But as you sort of said, it could be a huge saturation for 22-year-olds, I guess. Ruben helped balance that out. There were two things. I told Dick, I said, I'm going to really work. I'm going to work. And he said, well, just cool down. You're in Venice. See, enjoy, do things. Don't, you're not going to make your masterpieces here. So he cooled me down on that. And also I said, I'm overwhelmed here. I don't know what to look at. And there's so much. And there was something really good that he told me. He said, quit worrying about what you have to see. Just look, and what turns you on, and start from that. And as soon as he said that, it just worked immediately. I started to walk into museums and just go. And what I found was it very slowly, the two things aligned, all the things that Deanna was taking me to taking all of us to look at, but following my own intuition, they kind of merged. And so I thank the faculty for that.
I think there's something to be said about when you're on site, you're able to do that because you're not having your experience curated by another person, because you're really there and you can selectively look at something instead of a slide on a PowerPoint that's been chosen by a faculty member.
Well, I had experience traveling before. The previous year I had traveled around Europe, but I hadn't been settled in a place. So it's settling in a place for 6 weeks. That's what it was then. It really makes you appropriate the place. So it became my little city. And then when you go to a place and you kind of imbibe yourself with it, it becomes part of your visual repertoire that you can call upon later.
I think you can learn things in school. Then the question is, can you pick them up and carry them and internalize them? Or is it just an episode that you forget? So I think Venice was that kind of like where you learn to pick up that equipment and use it on your own. Now, and it's so funny because just since the idea of doing these interviews and reflecting on it, on Venice 37 years ago, it was really helpful for me to be able to look to realize in ways I hadn't necessarily thought out how it had helped me, and in these type of ways.
It's interesting, yeah, to have these little bits and pieces that come back to us, you know, years later. I worked on for maybe like 20 years on painting, and then after that, like maybe a little over 10 years ago, I started working on video dance, so filming people dancing, and then working with that, and then and creating situations with that. And then I worked on text, so painting of text, and then for about a few years, I was working on working with migrants and people who are migrants and people who are like in alternative situations, and working on huge murals with those kind of things. So, and then I'm working on a thesis at the present. I'm working on a writing project around those things. So, when I was doing video dance, I was really interested in capturing moments when people were in a state of kind of surrender or letting go. When you're filming, who's letting go? Who's like, is the filmmaker holding or letting go? Is the dance holding or letting go? That kind of thing. That came up really naturally. What's really interesting to me is when the letting go comes unintentionally, like when something doesn't work, when there's a disaster, and then what do you do? So that's what you were talking about a little bit about the pandemic. Like when you have these limitations that are not expected, what do you do? And so sometimes it can be reining in, and sometimes it can be like letting go. I've been working in architecture schools for about 12 years, and I had to do a few hours that I didn't have planned. And so I contacted this guy that I didn't know who works with migrants. And I offered to do just really short, like meet his students for an hour. And he invited me to go to the migrant camps. The place is called Les Grandes Saintes, which is near Dunkirk, which had a camp for about 1 year in 2016 that was built by Doctors Without Borders partly. And it was quite a long process because it's very controlled. Like to go, you have to have a pass, you have to have authorization to go there. And at the time there were about 1,500 people, mostly Kurdish there at the place that I went to. There were two things that were made. One was the sun that was made with 27 points that was representing the Kurdish sun on the Kurdish flag. So it had a religious sense and it had a representation of rebirth. There was a hesitation about making it because it does have a religious and a political meaning to it. But at the same time, I was hoping that we could focus more on the universal aspect of the sun and the sense of rebirth. And they were very, very happy to see that. It gave them like a huge uplifted feeling. And so many people were coming to work. So I went there with 4 students who offered to come work with me. And then they had many people who were coming around. And so we'd offer them a paintbrush and ask them, would you like to, paint a little bit? And we'd be showing them how to do that, like mini formations so that they could at least even do just a few strokes. And it was really, really uplifting. And I would give priority to the people that were the migrants that were trying, they're the people that worked there very regularly. And then finally people that work there more from time to time. And so we got this whole glossary, and it started inside this hangar. And, so we'd have like a word with A here, and then a B here, and then a C there, and like that. And then afterwards it started winding itself, snaking itself around and going like, and then it would be one on a door here, and then on a lamp post here, and then on a little, so you kind of had to find them, like you'd easily miss them. So you kind of wound your way around the buildings. And so I think that was maybe like from an artist's point of view, it could be more interesting because it had this kind of unexpected aspect to it. And it was very integrating. It was integrating a lot of people. So that's very much the idea of art, contextual art, as this person explains it, is working with other people.
There's sort of a triangle and of my art practice and what I do, and they're not that different, but that it keeps me alive. It keeps me working. When I burn out on one, I can move to the next one. And the 3 things are the work that I do when I get out of the studio and go draw. And this is what I call straight on drawing. It's just, I go out and I look at something and I try to draw it. That's not to say it's academic or stiff, and some of them have abstract. It's really a sort of a germination ground for what I'm going to do. With the other practice is that I work in a studio, and those tend to be large abstract works, but slowly this inner logic was at play, and these large abstract paintings, everything they have to do with the early work that I did when I travel. And the third one is that I do, again, outside work, but large canvases that are of these industrial landscapes. So unlike my abstract work, and are quite tight edge and almost photographic, but they still have a painterly quality. Between those 3 points are my fallow points and are my fallow periods where a huge part of my work is not working sometimes. I associate it with picking up new things, learning, going to museums, restocking my inspiration and energy. And I do less and less of that as I get older as well. And that's what people don't, people would like to say, oh, well, you're not committed, you don't know, you don't have an identity. And I think it's anything but. It's a long process. Yeah. That it's like a baby looking at a mobile above the bed, that they're actually getting closer and closer to each other and what they're about, and they're not really that alien.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of pressure with that because I'm like doing this research project. So the idea is to stay on this subject, on this subject, on this subject. And sometimes the way to get on the subject is because I have to go detour here, and then it goes all the way around, and then maybe it comes back, and maybe it'll come back in the right time frame, and maybe it'll come back later, or maybe it won't, and that'll be so.
And I'm glad you brought up the thing with Dick Rubin, because Dick Rubin did these large California, West Coast. He had a West Coast influence as well as a New York influence, and these large abstractions. And then he did these charcoal drawings that he would pull out, and sort of in intimacy, it wasn't like a secret he had to hide, but it was just something you didn't know about the man unless you went to see him, and they were very dear to him. And I think that Dick Rubin to me was probably the most valuable teacher I ever had in my life. And one thing Dick always said, and I thought it was he said this to me in Venice during that program, and he said, "It's all the same."
Yeah.
I thought, but when he said that, I was 22 years old, and it was like, oh, come on, lay off your, Carlos Castaneda. It's not all the same. There's figure painting, drawing a naked person, making it look like that person, and there's Mark Rothko. But then later I realized it is all the same. Yeah, but if you're wise enough to see that these same aesthetics, learning how to get out of the studio and learning how to work, and also the autonomy that gave me of getting away from what New York thinks you should do, what Miami thinks you should do, what Paris, there's different, and you don't realize that how heavy that is, even to people that aren't openly influenced, or they don't seem to be influenced by. And the third thing that Venice really helped me is that sort of critical eye of looking at art, going to museums. I mean, it took it to a higher level. Before that, I had gone to New York museums, and it was basically like, the American school, what we were taught. And now, I'm in Paris, and I'm going to these museums, and I've sort of a sense of discernment, a sense of being able to really look and draw and extract from the things. And
maybe being in a city like that, like also like Paris, there's the wandering. It's like in French, it's called flânerie. It's like just wandering, going here and there, like with no particular. And maybe that's like the most wonderful part of being in a city like that. When people come to visit me here, like, oh, gotta go see the Louvre, gotta go see this, like they have to do it, like it's an obligation, And they always say what I loved best was just wandering in the streets and going to a cafe.
Sure.
And when we were at Pensiones de Guzo, what was really amazing, it's such a touristy city, but nobody was around in the evening. Like it was so quiet, and you can find these corners where you just feel like a local, and you just take it all in, and it's just so wonderful. So